it looks like we're either headed into World War III or we are in World War III. Some people think we are at the beginning of World War III, and I'm starting to maybe agree that in the future, when we look back at this time period, we'll say, well, World War III began, and it will have began maybe at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. We might say that's the beginning of World War III. We might say that it was the Middle East and the rising there. What are you thinking? Do you think we're headed to World War III, or do you think we're in World War III?
I think if it comes to that, then I don't think we will be able to comment on it afterwards, because I believe that the doctrine that you can have a limited nuclear war or regionally limited war, that is not the case. I think that it is, as Ted Postol wrote many years ago, the nature of nuclear war, that once you start, eventually all nuclear weapons will be used. And that would, given the fact that you only need about 10% of all nuclear weapons to have a complete destruction of everything, including, following a nuclear winter of about 10 years, where, nothing will grow anymore on the planet. So therefore, even those people who think they can survive in a bunker may come out after a year or two and find that, there is just nothing around them. So I really think we are playing with a situation which is so unbelievably dangerous that, I can only hope that your show, as others, are in time waking enough people up, that we need really people on the streets. We need a mass revolt against what is happening right now, because what's at stake is everything whatever mankind has produced in all these generations, in terms of musical compositions, in terms of poetry, in terms of scientific discovery. All of that can go down and be lost forever. And I think people are not really clear about that, because I think if they were, they would be on the streets and they would stop those politicians who are pursuing this reckless policy.
I think it's kind of like getting cancer. Nobody ever thinks it's going to happen to them, right? They cannot believe it when the doctor gives them the diagnosis of, unfortunately, you have cancer and you don't have very much longer to live. And so I think when we look at the prospect of nuclear war and what it would do to the planet, I think a lot of people just kind of have that same, or just like when you get into a car, you don't think you're going to be the one getting into an accident, and I think it's that moving through life of, oh, that'll never really happen. That's not really going to happen. And we have that natural attitude about a lot of devastating events that could potentially happen to us. And so we're just sort of sleepwalking around like, oh, that's not a real risk. That happens to other people. I mean, not that nuclear war happens well, I mean, it happened to Japan, right? So we just kind of think that happens to other people, or it's something that happened a long time ago. It won't happen again. Or if it did, it wouldn't be a massive annihilation of the whole planet like what you're describing. It'll be like Japan. It'll be contained. It'll be terrible. We'll read about it in the history books, but Japan moved on and Japan is thriving today. And so I think there's that mentality that goes into it. But the nuclear weapons are different now, aren't they? They're not the same.
Well, the point is, that people have not the ambition to be truth-seeking. Uh, Most people live a life where they let their opinions be made by others. It can be the club in which they are, or it can be the mass media, or it can be, just the neighborhood in which they want to go along, to get along with their bosses. And so I think, the problem is that people really are not uh, trying to understand history, and therefore, they are extremely easy to be manipulated. And right now, there is a whole war going on between NATO on the one side and the so-called autocratic governments, which I think is not giving justice to these governments, because, I have been traveling a lot in my life, and, a lot of countries which are being demonized as authoritarian, autocratic dictatorships and all of this. they come from different cultures, and some of these cultures are doing much better than ours. And just because they're different, you cannot just say they're demonizing. Take China, for example. There is right now a huge buildup of tariffs and threats and trade war and whatnot. The reality is that China is a old culture of 5,000 years old, which was continuous for most of the time. Uh, until the 15th century, they were the leading culture in the world. And only for a couple of centuries, the West took over that role. But now, basically, the Western countries think that they have to keep hegemony and that they have to suppress the rise of these countries, while China, for example, I'm 100% certain, and I've looked at it a lot, is not aggressive. It's not trying to replace American imperialism, quote, by taking over a role of world leadership. On the other side, I was very shocked. I just was reading an article about an event which took place on the 20th of December in Washington by the CSIS. That's a think tank. And there, Admiral Thomas Buchanan basically made a speech where he said that the United States preserves the right to use nuclear weapons in a confrontation, with other countries to maintain U.S. hegemony. Now, I find this absolutely incredible because, this is, I mean, this is really something which, if there would be such a thing like international law, you couldn't get along with it, because I think this is unbelievable. And I think that the present situation of geopolitics, where basically the Wolfowitz doctrine is being still applied by the U.S. administration and by the Anglo-American special relationship, that is the idea which emerged about the end of the Cold War, where the neocons in the United States were saying that they will make sure that the United States will never be bypassed by any other country in terms of economic, military, or any form of power by any nation or group of nations in the world. And that is what the fight is all about, because I was just recently in China, in Guangdong, in Guangzhou. This is the Greater Bay Area. This is the motor of the world economy, and it is unbelievable. I was in China the first time in 71, and it was so poor. And now this is the leading economy. I mean, that's the motor of everything in terms of advanced technologies, AI, digital, quantum computers. I mean, just everything. They are so much ahead of time. And that is regarded as a threat. I mean, it doesn't have to be. But, I think Kurt Campbell, who is I think he still is the Undersecretary or Deputy Secretary of State in the United States, he made a speech a couple of weeks ago in front of the Senate Intelligence or Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of these committees, where he said, that it is the global south, that it is technology, that it is everything, why China is the enemy number one. I think this is terrible. If you don't get off this, I think we will end up in World War III in the short term.
Or at minimum, a Cold War where we're the target. I mean, I can really envision that as well. If China is rising, as you mentioned, their country is incredible. I do these YouTube walkthroughs. I like to explore the world when I can't actually explore the world, and I've been doing these YouTube walkthroughs of Chinese cities, just various Chinese cities, and it's incredible what these cities look like. I mean, they make the United States look like a third world crumbling country. I mean, we're reeling into the old world really quickly, and China's just, it looks phenomenal. I mean, everything's brand new and cutting edge. And as you said, they're coming up with a lot of the tech. They're exporting the goods. They are becoming, for sure, that hub. And I could see that, if the United States is going to keep taking this keep going down this path of we can use nukes in order to maintain power in the world, and if we're going to keep being warmongery, I could envision a time where China says, you know what, we're going to limit you. I mean, they already did. I mean, what did they just say the other day? That they're going to limit exports to the United States of certain minerals that could be used for weapons, right? They're already starting to clamp down and say, you know what, we don't want to trade with you certain things. And I could see them getting to a point where they say, you guys are a bunch of warmongers. You're dangerous. Because you're dangerous, we're going to cut you off. And we have the ability to do that because we're now the number one economy. And so we're going to, basically use the United States' own playbook against the United States, which is China could say, we trade, we're the number one trading partner with a lot of countries around the world. We will essentially tell them not to trade with you. We won't trade with you. And I could see the United States becoming like the Soviet Union, very at the time when the Soviet Union was very poor. I could see the United States reeling into immense poverty because the world has decided to cut us off because we're too dangerous. And that was our thinking with the Soviets, right? Our thinking was they're dangerous. So we have to limit them and hobble them and crush them. And I could see the world, maybe not using the same tactics of trying to do proxy wars everywhere and whatnot, but doing different things in order to keep us, basically treating us like a rabid dog. But we're behaving like a rabid dog. So I mean, what are they supposed to do when we're sitting here threatening, saying we're going to use nukes in order to maintain power? I mean, that's psychotic, totally and completely psychotic. So I could see, maybe, and this would be like a better case scenario, even though it's terrible. I could see a scenario where maybe the United States just gets isolated by the world and iced out by the world and turned into, a very poor place while the rest of the world advances around us. I could see that as well. And that would be better, I suppose, than nuclear annihilation, right? It still wouldn't be great. It still wouldn't be great. What do you think motivates these people in Washington? Do you think it's the military industrial complex and they're just paid off by lobbies? Or do you think they really have, like, there's something wrong with the psyche of American politicians?
Unfortunately, it's not just American politicians. We have a certain amount of those in Europe as well. These are people who I think they are not human. I think they have no human heart. They have a stone where other people have a heart, and they have some kind of a glue where other people have a mind. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with them because, if they would be sane, they wouldn't behave like that. But I
Yeah.
think when you ask yourself, why is it that obviously a lot of the policies of the West are utterly failing? The whole global South is turning against the collective West. Now, naturally, the mainstream media, they're blaming these countries of all being dictatorships and whatnot. But the reality is everything what is going wrong right now is a blowback against American and European policies, colonial policies and post-colonial policies. And you would think that these establishments would somehow, at least among themselves, get together and say, hey, wait a second, what did we do wrong? Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe if we correct that mistake, we could remedy the situation. No, you don't see any of that. They just keep doing more of the same. And then you wonder, I mean, in my view, somebody who has lost connection to reality, you could declare as clinically insane. I think that's a
Hmm.
just definition of craziness. And by that token, I think the majority of these establishments are clinically insane insofar as they are not relating anymore to the real world, real events in the world. And they keep reinforcing their opinions by just talking among themselves. I mean,
Hmm.
these normal politicians, they don't go, let's say, to a district in India and talk to the poor, or they don't go to a poor place in the United States. I mean, there are pockets in the United States which are like third world countries. They're not talking to these people. They may put up an appearance, shaking hands with babies for an election event, but they're not looking at what's around them. And instead, it's like that they are in some kind of a club, where they talk to their like people. And that is why you have this growing disconnect between the leaderships. And that's why Trump, I think, did win the second time the election, because, if it turns out to be that way or not, we will see. But the majority of the people think that Trump is one of theirs, even so he did a couple of things in his first term, which puts a couple of question marks on that. But, people think that the Beltway, the people inside the Beltway are a different species, and that's why they turn away from them. And you see the same phenomena in Europe. If you look at the French government just crumbled yesterday, and there will be political instability for probably more than half a year in France, because according to the constitution, they cannot vote, until a certain time has passed. So you will have in a crisis, a world crisis, no government in France for many months to come. You almost have no government in Germany, because on the 17th of December, Scholz, the chancellor, will ask the confidence vote, and he may lose, very likely. And then you have no government in Germany for a certain period. Then you have other elections, where in the eastern states in Germany, the established parties all got voted out. And I think you see right now that, if you look at the world from the top, what do you see? You see South Korea 2 days ago declared martial law. Can you imagine that? For 6 hours. Then the parliament got together and they undid what the president decided unilaterally. But that's a sign of utmost instability. Then if you look at the situation in Georgia, where there are definite efforts to recreate the Maidan coup, what was done against Ukraine in 2014, how is it functioning? By Western-financed NGOs who are trying to swing the election back into a pro-European Union condition, which I don't think will function. I hope it will not function, because this past election was the expression of the democratic will of the people from Georgia. Then you look at the situation in the Middle East. You have right now an absolute escalation. Not only is the horrible situation in Gaza continuing, which is now being characterized as genocide by many, many international organizations, but it's still going on in an absolutely unbelievable situation. Then, the Lebanon situation is a ceasefire, which doesn't really hold very well. And now you have an offensive by the Syrian rebels with the aim to oust Assad. And, we are sitting on a powder keg in the Middle East. I mean, this can go into a regional war, from there into a global war as well. And naturally, the situation in Ukraine. I mean, the situation in Ukraine is so dangerous, because, when basically Putin declared an update in the nuclear doctrine of Russia end of September, he did that in response to, all kinds of, weapon uses, the attack in the Kursk region by Ukraine, deep into the, or not so deep, but deep in the Russia territory. He updated the nuclear doctrine of Russia and basically said that Russia will, before they said they will use nuclear weapons only if the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation is at stake. And he changed that into saying, if there is an attack by a non-nuclear state, but which has the support of a nuclear state, they will preserve the right to use nuclear weapons. Now, that is a significant change, and you would think that this would have shaken up some people in the West to say, wait a second, we have to cool it. We should not escalate this any further. But what happened, is that the decision was made by Biden to allow the Ukrainians to use the ATACMS of which Biden had said himself before that he will not give the permission, because he fears this will escalate into a full war between the United States and Russia, and NATO and Russia. And now all of a sudden he gave the okay 2 weeks after Trump won the election, which clearly was a vote by people who don't want war, because, Trump promised at least he would stop all wars. So that he won the election. I read, that the American people don't want war, but Biden, 2 weeks later, does something which he himself characterized before as implying the danger of an escalation of a total war between the United States and Russia. And then the next day or 2 days later, uh, Putin did something extraordinary, which I think has not even penetrated the conscience of the people. He launched, or the Russian military launched, a new medium-range non-nuclear weapon called Oreshnik. And this weapon, this missile, flies at almost Mach 10 or Mach 11. Mach 11. Now that's really fast. That means 3 kilometers per second. And what that missile does is it has so much kinetic energy because of the high speed that on impact, it creates a crater like a meteor, except it's non-nuclear and it doesn't have the nuclear fallout. So it does not qualify as a weapon of mass destruction, and it does not escalate the level into a nuclear level because it's a non-nuclear weapon. But it cannot be intercepted. So at this point, all of Europe can be hit by this Oreshnik weapon missile without that the West can intercept it. Now, the West is now saying, oh, this is negligible, this is not so important. But I think it misses completely the point, because Russia, in response to all of these developments, has steadily worked to increase the technological level of its weapon systems. It has all these hypersonic weapons, the Kinshal and others. And, I think that the West is playing with fire by escalating this step by step. But I think we are soon reaching the point of no return. So I know a lot of people who are extremely worried that we have never been so close to nuclear war, not even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the difference was that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had Kennedy and Khrushchev talking on the red telephone, and having some kind of a dialogue, also specialists in the background. And, there is nothing of this sort at this point. There is no communication. And then you have this absolute escalation. And I think that is, what could go utterly wrong. And then there is nobody left to even ask why.
Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.